Andy Murray is, in case people have sort of breaking overnight, he's obviously getting set for the Australian Open, and it seems like it may well be his last match in the next few days. He is struggling pretty badly with a hip injury. He was pretty emotional when he addressed the press yesterday. It's a clip that we might be able to bring you in just a moment's time. But he says for the last 20 months he's been battling hard against this hip injury. It's caused him a lot of pain, and ultimately he's going to succumb to it. He's going to try and get through the next few months and try and play as far as Wimbledon and beyond if he can. But breaking down at the press conference yesterday, saying that actually his last match may come in the last couple of days. Take a look.
The pain is too much, really. Yeah, it's not something that I want to. I don't want to continue playing that way. I spoke to my team and I told them that, I can't keep doing this. I said to my team, look, I think I can kind of get through this until Wimbledon. That is where I would like to. That's where I would like to stop playing.
Yeah, he had to leave the press conference yesterday to go off and compose himself and then come back and give people the full detail as to what was going on. It wasn't something I was aware of, that the severity of which was about to end his career, I have to say.
Yeah, and getting to Wimbledon is an ambitious enough target by the sounds of that, isn't it? It doesn't actually sound like that's going to be something that's definite. When I saw the quotes this morning, it was like Andy Murray to retire after Wimbledon. I'd be surprised if he makes it that far. But then again, he is somebody who has battled through many things in his life and has actually become accustomed to the idea of pain more than a lot of other tennis players. And it's not easy to say that, because when you read any tennis autobiography or you listen to anybody speak about their experiences in the professional game, their relationship with pain is probably the most important relationship they have as a professional tennis player. But Andy Murray knows it better than most. Like Kevin Mitchell in The Guardian this morning, kind of doing a retrospective on his career, that the first time he came on the scene, the first thing he remembers Andy Murray talking about is back pains. That, of course, he was a kid at the time. He says it's growing pains in the back, but they were particularly excruciating. And then this particular injury, which is one of a slew of injuries that he's had during his career, has troubled him for quite some time. This right hip has been something that's brought Andy Murray down over the last couple of years, and you do have to say it has been a bit of a spiral downwards from the end of 2016. It's been a couple of extremely tough years for him. And I guess when it comes to this sort of stuff, we're never quite sure what's going on. And when it's somebody like Andy Murray, particularly the way he's covered in the United Kingdom, there's always such a spotlight that every little bit of information that can be possibly got out of him has been published over the last couple of years. But I do think there was kind of an essence of kind of pulling the cork off the top of the bottle there this morning, and he just let all the emotion come out.
Yeah, the context was that he had been had a warm-up match with Novak Djokovic and had to withdraw from that, and there were photographs of that as well, and he looks pretty upset, I suppose, on the court side afterwards. And it may have been that some of that was kind of still bubbling under with him, that he was still frustrated with that and maybe sort of said too much at some point or another. I don't know. Only time is going to tell. As you say, it may well be his opening round of the Australian Open against pretty tough opponent as well, may end up being his last. And I have to say, one of the thoughts that struck me this morning was that I was kind of disappointed with myself that I hadn't appreciated Andy Murray a little bit earlier. I always sort of, for a large part of his career, just saw him as this moany sort of, the plucky underdog, a large sort of dour Scot, and obviously the British media sort of darling of times, and that's never going to endear itself to an Irish audience, obviously. But actually, he's really, in a lot of ways, none of those things. He's really sort of anti-drugs and not afraid to be kind of outspoken about it. He's got a really large dollop of dry wit and is actually a pretty likeable character, it turns out. It just took me about 15 years to figure it out. Yeah,
the irony is that you might look at those characteristics. I think a lot of people would agree with you that they didn't instantly warm to him, but those characteristics that you say aren't exactly something that an Irish audience would warm to, when in actual fact the very characteristics that Andy Murray has that are likeable are things that Irish people tend to like. I think his sense of humour is brilliant, and I don't think it was immediately identifiable that that's exactly the way he operates. And Like we could easily be sitting here talking about a guy who was the darling of the British press and what has he ever achieved. And it did look, if you were a cynic for a time in his career, that was going to be the case when he got to his mid-20s, and it still looked like there was a bit of a gap between him and the rest, and he managed to close that and he managed to get his win. And you kind of look at him as the post-peak Federer and Nadal era, if I can use that phrase, because I don't think, if you look at, like, say, this time last year, it was
I know, but I think the point stands, yeah.
Like, we've had a Federer and Nadal final, we've had them coming back to their peak since Murray's
But there
peak.
is a post-Federer and Nadal era.
Yeah, and it was Djokovic and it was Murray that rolled.
So for all that, he might have won more almost.
Potentially, if it wasn't for Novak Djokovic, he certainly would have won more. I would definitely say that. But you kind of look at the other of the big four around him at the peak, and Federer far more talented as an actual ball striker in terms of the grace. Nadal, when it comes to power, far better athlete, and then Djokovic as this absolute freak, as a man who would never be rumbled in terms of his mental fortitude, and also kind of a mix of the Federer and Nadal style of the grace and the power that he has. There's no question for me out of those four players, Andy Murray is a comfortable fourth when it comes to natural ability.
Yeah, he'll never be described as a great of the game. He'll be forgotten about in the context of the game in a world sense at some point.
Like in a British sense.
Oh, in a British sense, no, he'll live forever. I mean,
like obviously people can say Fred Perry, whatever. That's going to be up for debate. But I just really think that for somebody in that position to win what he did, despite the fact that there was a gap between him and the other big three in tennis at the time, it just really says a lot for the character of the guy that he managed to fight through that ceiling, because it could have so easily been a situation of settling for what he's got and being famous, being rich, and not winning that Grand Slam, and then he ended up winning a handful of them.
And again, he's not dead. He's just probably going to have to retire from the game. And
no, his career is almost over. That's why we're talking about his career. We're not talking about the life of Andy Murray.
You just alluded to the fact at the top that he might be disappearing from our worlds. And actually, the reality is that we'll probably hear more from Andy Murray post his retirement than we ever did during it, because you can be absolutely certain that he's going to get involved in the media.
He's an excellent pundit. Himself and Tim Henman did one of the days in Wimbledon last summer, and it was one of the best hours of television ever. To be fair, actually, I say he's an excellent pundit. It was only funny because the two lads were just ripping the piss out of each other for the whole time. So we'll wait to see what his analysis is like.
It was one of the best hours of television ever, by the way.
Yeah, it was.
You're standing by that one?
Yeah.
Off with the news that we discussed a little bit earlier about Andy Murray and potentially the end of his career.
Yeah, he was heartbroken last night when he addressed the media. He had to stop, go out, compose himself, and then come back and start the press conference. But Andy Murray has announced he will be forced to retire at some stage this year. A debilitating hip injury has left the former world number one in constant agony, and the Scot says he has no choice but to finish up. The 31-year-old will try and play through the pain at the Australian Open, but a tearful Murray has admitted his days are numbered.
Yeah, I think there's a chance of that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like I said, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm able to play through the pain, for another 4 or 5 months. I have an option to have another operation, which will allow me to have a better quality of life and be out of pain. There's little things like, day to day that are also a struggle, and it'd be nice to be able to do them without any pain, putting shoes on, socks on, things like that.
God, when it's that bad, you assume that it almost becomes a pretty straightforward decision that, like, if he's struggling to put his shoes on, he's got his kid, hasn't he?
Yeah,
right?
I'm not sure.
I mean, anyway, that sort of stuff that suddenly you realise that actually this just isn't worth it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of chronic pain, you'd wonder, is it even worth one last crack? I mean, he spent 2 years trying to even get back to a position where he's playing any kind of tennis at any level, and it was heartbreaking to watch him, because he was a broken man. He was broken physically by it, and you could tell that mentally, while he had kind of made his decision, he hadn't come to terms with it, because he was still some way thinking he could get to Wimbledon. Well, he admitted even after saying, Wimbledon is where I'd like to get, as far as I'm not getting to Wimbledon, lads. The
operation that he's talking about there is not one to get him back in the court, by the sounds of things. That's one just to give him a decent quality of life when he jacks in tennis.
Yeah, he made the point that some players have come back, I think he called it a hip shaving, I think where they shave part of it down. He did say some players have got back, but it is not designed to rehab you from a sports point of view. It's designed to get you out of chronic pain.
Presumably he'll have a replacement at some stage. Like, it's only a matter of when. You just don't want to get it too early in your life, obviously. He's still 31 years of age. He's still a very, very young man to be going through something like this.
You have to replace it every 10 to 12 years, I think, something like that. I've heard Dennis Leamy speak about it before,
The longer you keep it going, the better. But, like, again, just coming back to this idea that the horror stories these tennis players have of pain, like, the most famous one, and it's cliche at this point, is just the Agassi chapters of the pain. He, like, couldn't sleep in a bed, for example, had to lie on a hard floor to
back pain.
Exactly. It's such a tough kind of career path. Although a lot of people out there this morning be like, he's got plenty of money to get it fixed.
Missing the point spectacularly.